Hi guys, welcome to the explanation for PT10 Game 4. For those of you looking at this in the context of the combination games lesson, this is a very rare type of game that is both a combination of grouping, in-out, and then ordering, but it's also got characteristics to the pieces, which just makes things a little more complicated. It's an extra wrinkle. And one thing about this game is I think that once you have the setup right, the actual questions themselves are not that difficult, which is a common theme. Games, there's usually a trade-off where harder setups means easier solving, whereas easier setup often can mean harder solving. Not always, but you'll notice that pattern. Okay, so I didn't really want to focus on the rules in this lesson, so I've got them all jotted down already. We use the two chains method, so everything you see on this side of the line is going to have its contrapositive written down here, right? That just makes it a little bit easier mentally. And then we had two kind of rules that were about a combination of ordering and grouping rules. This one tells us if J-O is in, then we see this order, right? J before O. This one tells us that if X is in fifth, then we're going to have a Rodrigo Concerto in the first position. I didn't do the contrapositives of these rules, but we could easily figure them out. If you don't see J and O in this order, it's just breaking the rule, right? If they're both in, whereas if you don't see either of them, the rule doesn't apply. What we really wanted to focus in on here is the setup. We know we're selecting some of these works, and they're going to be played on 6 consecutive Sundays. But there's more than 6 pieces up here, right? So some of these things are getting thrown in the out group, and that's really the key here. So I drew my bare bones schematic for an in and out game where we're going to have the inside over here and the outside over here. And the only place we're doing the ordering is the inside, the works that are actually selected to be played. So I want to get those 6 pieces over here, the 6 spaces to order over here. But with just this game board, we're not going to really be capturing all the information we need to make inferences here, because a big part of this game is going to be the grouping task. And normally we just could kind of pile things in over here above and then take care of the ordering later, pile things in back here. But because we have these characteristics, we want to keep track of them much the same way we did in any in-out game with characteristics. Here, for example, you know that 2 of the plays are by G. So I'm going to keep a separate area to keep track of that. I'll just use my subscript method. We know these are both going to be G spaces, right? And then we know that we've got 2 by Vivaldi as well, right? And then 2 by Rodrigo as well. So R, R. And that tells us a lot about what's on the outside, too. 2 of those are being used, 2 of those R's are being used, well, 2 are not being used over here. Remember, on in-out games, we care about the outside just as much. If you learn that something's out, you can infer that, once you've used all those out spaces, that the other R's are going in. And that can be a really critical inference. So we're going to have 2 R's out here, 1 G out, and 1 V out. And then looking at these rules, we can make some more inferences. And I would have made these inferences as I'm going along making these rules. But for example, here, if N is in, M is out. And if M's in, then following the chain here, N is out. So that means like one of these R spots has to be M or N, right? So there's a good example of a big inference right there. Another one, and I'm looking at pairs of things with the same characteristic here. If X is in, then Z's out. And if Z is in, then X is out. And that's a thing, those are things with the same characteristic there. They're both Vivaldi works. So that's huge. We know one of those 2 is out, X or Z. And that means Y has to be in all the time, right? Let's change that to black. So very complicated diagramming here. Basically, we're going to have to worry about the grouping first, as always, and then only think about the ordering after that. But now that we've gotten these inferences, things are going to be much, much easier. We could add that this has to be one of X or Z here. So we'll skip the acceptability question and move on here to 20. For the 6 concertos played, we have J, K, N, O, Y, and Z. And then we know N's on the first Sunday, and that's Rodrigo. So now it would have possibly applied to this rule, but X is not even in here, so we don't worry about that. And then they can ask us, which one of the following cannot be played on the second Sunday? Well, the only rule that could really possibly come into play here, I'm looking at both J and O being in, right? And that means we need to see the order J, O. Well, there's no way that O can be here, or there'd be no space for J. It's going to end up kicked down. And that can't work, right? So we can't have O on the second Sunday. And that gives us C as an answer choice. Relatively easy solve here. They're just having us get into it and warm up a bit. Okay, for 21, if J, O, and Y are the first concertos to be played, not necessarily in that order, so we can only leave them floating up above here. What can't be played on the fifth Sunday? Well, we have a rule about that fifth Sunday, so I'm going to see if that's what solves this here, right? If X was in fifth, well, that's going to force an R to be in first. And the only R play we have there is O. But now with J and O together, they have to follow this order here. J, O. And we can't have J, hanging off the board here. So this doesn't work. And that tells us that X can't be in fifth. I'm going to look at that as a possible answer. And boom, there it is. So just kind of looking at like a heads-up play about which rule might come into play when we're talking about the fifth spot helps us solve that very quickly. That's a common theme in games. When you see something in the question prompt that calls to mind a rule that talks about that same area of the board or those same variables, check that out first. Okay, if O is selected for the first Sunday, well, we should know the theme now that with this, that means J is out, right? And J is a G play. That means that that's the only G play out. The other two are in here, H and K. So I don't even know the rest of the question yet, but I've already made some big inferences. So what's a play that must also be selected if O is first? Well, we know it's one of H or K here. And we're only given K in the answer choice, and that's B. So here, treating this as an in-out game and really like taking the time to make this setup back here in the outside really paid off. If you just had an out group with no spaces telling us about the characteristics, you wouldn't have made that quick inference that I just made there. That shows us the importance of like doing the whole thing out properly like we did. Okay, which of the following is a concerto that must be selected? We already made that inference, boom, way back, why, so that's like a freebie. Again, that was something that happened because we were keeping track of these characteristics. How many Vivaldis had to be in the outgroup, how many had to be in, right? We saw that X and Z don't play nicely together, right? That means one of those two has to be out, and that's going to inevitably result in Y needing to get used because we have to have two Vivaldis in. Okay, what's a concerto that can't be together with N? Well, just follow the chain of our logic here. N in means that J's in, and then that's going to kick M out. So M is our answer there. Simple. That's at the end of the section. Sometimes they throw you an easy question because they know a lot of people be getting here with severe time pressure. So just keeping your wits about you can often help you score a point right at the end there with an easy question. All right, that's the game. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you on the next one.